When is an EQ move a mistake? And furthermore, how many times have you watched the video where someone went, "Don't do this," just to turn around and watch it on Nail the Mix or some whatever course you may have purchased from a professional, and they do exactly that, and the EQ move sounds awesome? What is going on? By the way, before we get going here, if you just want EQ recipes and tell me the EQ move, Scott, just click off the video. This video is not for you. I want to talk to people who are actually serious about fixing their EQ mistakes and who have realized already that searching for EQ recipes and, whatever and whatnot and presets, they don't work. So with that said, let's move on to mistake number one. Trying to EQ with an improper listening situation. I mean, come on. If you were going to hire me to fix the plumbing in your house and I showed up with some Fisher-Price plastic tools and some rubber bands, you'd be like, dude, what are you doing? Get out of here. You'd be expecting a plumber with a proper kit to get the job done for whatever the problem might be. And so when you make that comparison, it's kind of, it makes sense that, okay, yeah, you want to EQ correctly, but you don't want to invest in good listening environment, be that studio monitors or a pair of headphones. With studio monitors, it's a bit more difficult. You need to have a room, and you got to move the speakers around in the room to where they work best, acoustic treatment, and then on top of that, ideally, you would want to get something like SoundID reference to help calibrate your speakers to work in the room even better. Now, that's a lot of work. Again, not sexy, because the plugins companies say, yeah, just buy this plugin, EQ, good, here, use this preset, done, great. Now, in terms of mixing in headphones, completely doable, completely possible. You just need to get yourself the best quality studio headphones that you can afford. Again, pair that with the SoundID reference software, and then you're off to the races. Now you have at least set yourself up to be able to hear what you're actually listening to so you can determine what may or may not need to be EQ'd. So the best way to avoid all of your EQ mistakes really is step number one, invest in your listening situation. If you don't have a good set of studio monitors in a good room that's acoustically treated as well as it can be with the SoundID reference software calibrated to the room, or if you don't have studio headphones, that should be the first thing that you should care about. It doesn't matter what you're trying to mix or anything like that. You need to improve your listening situation. You shouldn't buy a single plugin until you have a great pair of studio headphones or your room is properly set up for mixing. Now let's say, Scott, listen, I got the headphones, I got that all stuff, but I still can't EQ. So, mistake number two is not understanding your sound source or actively listening to it. Every single sound source exists within the same plane of 0 Hz to 20,000 kilohertz. We basically put all of our information in this frame, right? And there are different levels. There's subs, lows, low mids, mid-range, highs, high highs, and all of the instruments occupy various different regions there. Each region contributes to its own set of problems. Well, what are these problems? If you have a snare drum, if I say, man, there's a lot of honk in that snare drum, what did I just communicate to you? What does that mean? Where should you start looking? So when you start actively listening to your sound source, especially when you have a good listening situation, you can really start to understand, oh, okay, well, this EQ preset is wrong because my problem is over here, on this side of the frequency, and I should really deal with that. So once you start learning the frequency spectrum and actively listening to your sources, you can begin to understand how to EQ them correctly. Because remember, it's not so much like EQ mistakes that you need to watch out for. This is all cumulative, guys. A lot of pros will say mixing is a series of steps and answers and, moves. You don't just EQ, bring up the mix, EQ, and then done. It's always a give and take relationship. You do a little bit of EQ here, it actually has a ripple effect against the entire mix. So if you were to miss a low mid problem, for example, in your bass guitar, if you miss that, or you're going to put the compressor on the bass, it's just going to exacerbate the problem. And then that'll stack as you continue to bring more elements into the mix. Then you're finally trying to put a master chain on your mix, and you're like, what is going on here? It's super muddy, it's dark, it's unintelligible. What happened? Well, that one initial move that you missed with the EQ and the low mids on the bass rippled all the way across the mix. So in order to avoid this mistake, you gotta, we call it paying the dues. You gotta pay your dues. You gotta sit with a session. You gotta go instrument by instrument. You need to learn what they do in the frequency spectrum. You need to know, okay, bass guitar and metal, so there's got some problem spots usually in this area. Let's look at these first. Let's diagnose them. Let's compare, with a reference track. You should be using a reference track. I just did a workshop where I talked about how to use a reference track. Check the link below. It was awesome. Everyone loved it, had a great time. It's on my website right now. You can go grab it. But I talk about how to use a reference track, how to analyze it, what you're listening for, what key elements you need to understand. And you can take that reference track and then you can apply it to okay, here's my instrument and here's what it's doing. And if you don't know what an instrument sounds like in the frequency range, go on YouTube, try to search for elements that are soloed. Hey, what does a kick drum that's not EQ'd in a room sound like? What is a snare drum that's just recorded, not EQ'd, not compressed? What does that sound like? Try to download that source, bring it into your DAW, and then do some frequency sweeping to figure out what's happening. Where are the problem spots? What's going on? Where are the spots that you could boost to make it sound better? All right, so avoiding the mistake is all about learning the frequency curve that you work in from 0 to 20K, and then how those instruments interact in each frequency curve and then together. EQ mistake number 3 is we just discussed frequency sweeping, right? A big mistake that I made for many years was I was putting too much gain on the cone, on the hump, on the top of the Q. I was jacking that gain way up. I was going 15 dB trying to frequency sweep, listen to problems in the mix going, what's going on? Well, as it turns out, there's a difference between jacking the Q up like that on a console versus a digital plugin. So with a digital plugin, you can get that, you can literally create an arrow like this. And what happens is you will create a whistle and a resonance. What this means is that everything sounds like shit. Everything sounds like shit when you boost it that much trying to frequency sweep. I made this mistake for years, guys. I was like, oh my god, it all sounds bad. Which one do I choose? How am I supposed to know what to do this? I guess I just need to practice more. Well, it was an error in the technique. Frequency sweeping is great, but you really you want to bump it 5, 6, 7 dB. You don't want to get too crazy with the gain because everything is going to sound bad when you just point it into the sky like this in the frequency and you make your cone like a point. It's always going to sound bad. So lay off adding gain when you're doing frequency sweeping. All right, here's a little bonus mistake. It's not really a mistake. It's more of using the EQ to its full potential. In most EQ plugins, there's going to be the parametric I'm talking about. There's the frequency here, the graph. You can see what everything's going. Then you have your bandwidth and ranges and stuff. And off to the side of the plugin is generally a volume slider. You can use it the same way that you can use a compression plugin. So if you're doing pretty extreme amounts of EQ, for example, you're digging out a lot of mid-range out of a tom, for example, there's going to be a reduction in volume. So it's really hard to diagnose, is that EQ move good? Or do I don't like it because it's not loud enough, right? So we got to remember that loud sources, for some reason, as humans, we just, loud, good, sounds great, yes. Wrong. You can use that volume adjustment slider in the same way that you would use with a compressor. So you could adjust the volume up if you do a lot of mid-range, for example. We really perceive mid-range. And then you could adjust the volume slider up to where it's the same level before EQ. Now, even better is a lot of EQ plugins, even stock ones like in Cubase, will have an auto volume button. Turn that button on. Do auto volume compensation, and you might go, wow, okay, that EQ move is not really what I needed. So auto volume compensation on EQ plugins, turn it on. Experiment EQing with that thing on and see what happens. I bet you're going to notice a huge difference. So like I'm saying, guys, EQ mistakes, what is that? In this song, it could be a mistake. Well, in this song, it could be the right thing to do. This is kind of the frustrating thing about mixing music because there's so many different points of view, and there truly are so many different ways to get to the same spot or the end of a mix, right? Every mixer engineer has their own little thing that they do, and it's all different, but one thing is the same. They have a good listening position, and they know what they're listening for when they're EQing. Or if they don't know what they're listening for, they hear something in a certain range, and so they go into that range to attack it. And like I mentioned, I just did a workshop last weekend where I talked exactly about this and demonstrated it step by step. There's actually 2 PDFs that I wrote, how to actually EQ and the massive EQ guide that goes into all of this. Because guys, EQ is the fundamental, most basic thing that you have to master before worrying about compression, before worrying about effects, saturation, distortion, and even before caring about a master chain. Because like I said before in the video, if you miss an EQ move, it'll ripple across the entire mix. So a lot of the problems that, I faced as a new mixer was just I had a poor listening environment. I didn't know what I was hearing. I wasn't able to accurately diagnose problems with certain instruments, and I just needed time. I just needed the experience to get in there and in EQ and listen to things and figure it out. So you can skip a lot of frustration by getting your listening situation set up and then learning a systematic way to EQ correctly so that you can practice correctly. Because here's an interesting thing, guys, okay? A lot of people say you got to put in your 10,000 hours. You put in your 10,000 hours and then you'll get mastery. 10,000 hours of practice does not equate mastery. 10,000 hours of the right practice equates mastery. I can play guitar right now and just derp around with no rhyme or reason, and I'll get really good at derping around. I won't be any better at specific techniques, picking styles, sweeps, tremolo picking, unless I sit down and consciously practice that, okay? The last thing I want to leave you with is when I was working with Wojtek at Hertz Studio, I said something to him one time because I was watching him mix and he's so fast and his decisions are amazing. I'm going, wow, dude, you are so much better than me. And Wojtek stopped working. He turned his chin and he looked at me and he said, I'm not better than you, Scott. I'm just more experienced. And that's it, guys. I hope this video helps you understand that I'm not better than you. I'm just a little bit more experienced. So if you want to start getting the right practice and practicing the right way so you can grow and gain experience, consider checking out the workshop, okay? Hope the video helped you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.